So welcome to this WiseOwl tutorial on working with dictionaries in Python. Here's what you'll learn during this tutorial. We'll begin by looking at what dictionaries actually are, which always used to puzzle me a bit, I'll be honest. We'll then look at how you can create a dictionary in Python, and then how you can loop over the items in it to list them out. Then we'll look at how you can edit a dictionary by adding and removing and editing items. And then we'll go on to a worked example, a realistic example. We're going to store a list of films in a dictionary, and then in the second part of the example, I'll show you how to sort the films and print them back out again. As always, you'll be able to click on the link at the top right of the screen at any time, which should appear about now, to download files to do with the tutorial and any exercises. And as always, I'm now going to vanish so that I can hand over control to my colleague Sven, who will reliably guide you through the rest of this tutorial. So let's get started. So what are dictionaries? Well, basically they're a set of key value pairs, but that doesn't really quite answer the question because we need to find out what a key value pair is. Take the example of an online dictionary, and suppose you want to know what an owl means. You type in the word owl in the Cambridge Dictionary, for example, and it gives you a definition of it. In fact, it gives you a couple with some pictures. This is a key value pair. The key is the word owl. That's what you use to look up items. You could have used any word you like and you would have got different definitions. And the value is everything else. So it's all the definitions and the pictures and the grammatical notes you get as a result of looking up a word. So that's called the value. So let's look at a couple of realistic examples of how you might use a dictionary. For the first one, let's assume that you have a national insurance database. You give your national insurance number, and I really hope at this point that this national insurance number doesn't belong to anyone, and if it does, I do apologise. So you give somebody your national insurance number, and the dictionary gives you back their name and details. So if you wanted to set this in Python, you would type in something like national insurance square brackets and then the key value, and you'll get back, in this case, a tuple, giving 3 bits of information about that person: their first name, their last name, and their date of birth. So let's do a second example of a dictionary. Supposing that you wanted to set up a dictionary of all the WiseOwl Python tutorials. There's 10 of them so far, although this is actually the 11th. The key in that case might be the number of the tutorial, 10, and the value might be the name of the tutorial. The previous one was called sets, and how long it lasted. So in this case, if you wanted to set that in Python, you could type in on the left-hand side the name of the dictionary. Let's say it was called WiseOwl Tutorials, the key you want to retrieve, which is tutorial number 10, and the value in this case would again be a tuple, given the name of the tutorial, its length in minutes, and in seconds. So that is what a dictionary is. What we're now going to do is look at how you create dictionaries in Python before going on to some examples of actually using them. So you'll see that I've created a file called creatingdictionaries.py, and what I'm going to do is show you 2 ways to create a dictionary of all the first 5, possibly even just the first 3 tutorials in this series, very self-referential. So I put the names of them up above just so I can refer to them, and so you can see where I'm going. So the first method of creating a dictionary, which I'm going to call method 1 for fairly obvious reasons, you can create the name of a variable, so I'm going to call mine vids1 for equally obvious reasons. And what I can do is use the curly brackets to create a dictionary. Now, if you've been watching this tutorial series to date, the last thing you'll have done is create a set. And I taught you in that tutorial that when you put curly brackets in, you're creating a set. Well, it's all down to context. Python will determine from what you write inside the curly brackets what you're trying to do. So the syntax we're going to use is we're going to put the key, which is how we look up the value in the dictionary, then a colon, and then the value. So I'll just call my first one setup. I'll call my second one VS Code, because I think the last thing you want to do is sit and watch me typing in information. And I'll call the third one ranges, etc. And that will create a dictionary. Do you believe me? You shouldn't, so let's print it out. So I'll print out 2 things. I'll print out the variable itself, but then I'll print out the type of the variable, Always important to check you've got the right sort of thing. And when I run that, you should see it gives me the dictionary, but also tells me that it is a dictionary, or a dict, as it's called for short. So that is my first method for creating a dictionary. The second method, I'm going to create another variable called vids2, and this time I'm going to use the dict function. Now, because it's a function, I put round brackets in, and then what I can do within the round brackets is specify my key value pairs. And the syntax is this: you put the name of the key, an equal sign, and the value. But it doesn't look like it's happy with that. And the reason is the key name in this case, if you use this syntax, can't be a number as far as I can see. So what I'll have to do is put something like v1 in instead. And then it's happy with it. So for the second one, I'll put v2 equals, and I'll call this VS code. And finally, I'll do v3 and set that equal to ranges, etc. Quotation marks. So I'll do the same thing with this. I'll print out the dictionary and its type, making sure that I switch from the first dictionary to the second one. And when I run this code, you should see I get exactly the same thing for that. The only difference is I've used a different key. The first one uses an integer key, the second one uses a text one. Which method's better? Well, aside from the obvious fact the second one didn't allow us to use integers, I think it's really up to you. I quite like the fact that the first one is implicitly creating a dictionary without you having to declare that, which seems to me a bit more Pythonic, so I'm probably going to go with the first one if we come to this in the future. So that's how you create dictionaries. Now let's see how you can loop over the values to get them back out again. So just before we begin, I'm just going to comment out these lines of code so they don't get in the way. And I'll also rename my variable from vids1 to vid to make it easier to type. So to print out or loop over the values in a dictionary, so to loop over the dictionary elements, is quite nice and intuitive up to a point. So we saw earlier the enumerate function for looping over the items in a list, which allows you to get at their individual index numbers. And the syntax for this is very similar in that you put two variables instead of just one in the for clause. I'm going to call mine key and value, at least the first time round. I'll do two versions of this. And then you can put the name of the dictionary. And that's what it should be. And that would be nice and intuitive. So then I could print out the information. So I could print out a message containing a placeholder for the video number and then a placeholder for the video name. Format function in to fill in my bits of information, which are the key and the value. But if I try running that, you'll see it gives me an error message. It says cannot unpack non-iterable int object. And the reason for that is, for some reason, Python won't let you just put the name of the dictionary. This seems to me a failing in Python. You get used to such high standards that it's disappointing when it lets you down. So instead you have to put items, and then you run it again, and it still gives you an error message. And the reason for that is items is a function which returns a collection of dictionary objects. You can see if you let your mouse linger over it that I guess it provides a set-like object providing a view on dictionaries items. I think that just about makes sense. And then if I run that, it will make sense. But I always forget the items and I always forget the open close brackets. So let's do that a second time. It said in Teletubby Land again. So this time I'm going to do exactly the same thing, but just give you really an idea about how variable naming. Instead of calling the key and value, I could have called the two things something more descriptive. So I could have called it something like video number and video title. But the rest of the code will be exactly the same. So I can say in vids.items, not forgetting the open close brackets, I could print out, and this time I'm just going to print out the two things. I won't bother with any fancy formatting. And if I run that, you'll see I get the same thing. I get it just without the dash in the middle. So two different ways of naming variables. The first one has the advantage that you don't lose sight of the fact that this is a key and this is a value. The second one is perhaps easier to read the code because you've given more descriptive name to your variables, and I'll leave it to you which one you prefer. So to illustrate adding, editing and removing items in the dictionary, I'm going to switch example to something more interesting, I think. We'll have a table, or a dictionary rather, of actors. For each actor, we'll store their name and their date of birth. So we're going to have to work with the date time module. Working with dates is a bit messy in Python, which is why I've put off doing it until now. So we'll create a new dictionary called actors. And I just so happen to have something in my clipboard listing out the actors. There's one deliberate mistake in there, so if you're a Bruce Willis fan, don't get too despondent. So that's my dictionary, and what I'll do is just show listing out the items, which is what we did previously, just so we've got something to refer to as debug, if you like. So I'll use my syntax of having proper variable names rather than just key value, and not forgetting the dot items at the end. I can print out the actor's name and their date of birth. I'm actually going to print out two things for debug purposes. I'm going to show the type of each bit of information. So I'll have the type of the actor's name and the type of the date of birth. And then I'll actually show the information itself. So we'll have the actor's name and we'll have the date of birth. And to do the date of birth so you can actually read it, I'm going to paste in something from the clipboard, which is the strftime function. I did say dates are clunky in Python. I'll do a separate module on working with dates and strings and numbers later in this tutorial series, but for the moment, let's have a look at what that actually gives. So if I run my program, you'll see for each actor, it gives the type of the information, which is a string or a date time, and it gives their name and their date of birth. So all good so far. So to get to the point, finally, let's try adding, editing and deleting people. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add Emma Stone, who's one of my favourite actresses, particularly how she appeared in La La Land, I would say. So Emma Stone was born on, oh, I just happened to have it there, 6th of November 1988. So we can add an actor, and to add an item to a dictionary, you specify in square brackets the name of the key, which in this case is Emma Stone, and you set that key value equal to her date of birth, which embarrassingly I've already forgotten. 1988, comma, it was 6th of November, so I need to put the month next and then the day, and that's Emma Stone added. I'm going to just comment out this line for a second and run that, and so when you run the program you can see it gives you Emma Stone and her date of birth. She's added at the end of the dictionary, as you would probably expect. So that's how you can add one. To change something, I'm going to change Bruce Willis's date of birth to be correct. So I'll just copy that to the clipboard. To do that is exactly the same syntax. So once you've created a dictionary, they're very easy to work with. So what I'm going to do is set the value for Bruce Willis to be not what it used to be, but he was actually born the 19th of March. Did you spot that mistake? So what that will do is delete the old Bruce Willis and create a new one with a new date of birth. And if I run that, you'll see I still only have one Bruce Willis, but he's got a correct date of birth. And finally, you can remove items. And to remove an item from the list, who should we remove? I think Tom Cruise. Never the same after Top Gun. So to delete an item, you just put the del command, and then you specify who you want to get rid of. So we're losing Tom. So if I run that program, you can see I only have 4 people left. The other thing I was going to mention is about data types. Both the key and the value can have any data type you like. I'm going to add myself, set my name to be Andy. That's my key, but I absolutely refuse to give him my age. So what I'm going to do is put the number 42 in there instead. Now, this line here will now crash because it's trying to refer to the strftime function, assuming it's the date of birth. So I'll just remove that. And what I'll do is just print out the data types of all the different keys and values. So now if I run that, you'll see the 5th one tells me I've actually stored an integer for the value rather than a date time. And I could do the same thing with the key. So I could have actually done this the other way around. This is Python being typically forgiving of data types, which other languages wouldn't be. If I run that, it still works, but I've got 4 items where the key is a string and then one where it's an integer. This is a bad idea and something you should avoid doing, but unfortunately Python won't stop you doing it. What we're going to do now is a nice practical example of how you would use dictionaries in reality. I've got a file of movies.csv, and as always, you can download that as one of the files associated with this tutorial. And it contains 10 films with various bits of information like the film title and the director and so on. What we're going to do is read this into a dictionary using the film title as a key, and that will give us access to all the other bits of information about it. The only unusual thing about this is normally you would probably use the film unique film number as an ID instead. The problem with using a title is it might not necessarily be unique. After all, how many Invasions of the Body Snatchers films have there been? But for this case, I think using the film title will be okay. So the first thing I'm going to do is just copy 2 or 3 lines of code, or 2 or 3 lines of CSV file, I should say, into the top of a new file I've created called filmsexample.py. And what I'm going to do is just comment that out, and I'll use that as reference so I can remember the order of the columns. So I'm going to open up this file for reading. So to do that, I can type in the R prefix as so often, and then I can paste in the file path. And I'm going to call this movie file. What I can then do is read in the lines. And to do that, I'm going to create a variable called lines. I'm going to read in the entirety of the text file from beginning to end and split it so that I get the individual lines. But I don't want the top one because the top one contains the headings. So what I'll do is just use a slicer to pick out everything from the first line onwards. So that gives me the films. Then what I'm going to do is read them in one by one and divide it up into the different bits. So actually, I couldn't think of a suitable comment for that. So I'll say for line in lines. Then I'll create a variable which I'll call bits to take the line and split it up by a comma. So that will actually give me a list with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 elements in. What I'll do is use the first element as the key and the rest of the elements as the value. So I need to add this to my dictionary, but I don't yet have a dictionary. So I need to just go back up to the top here and create a new dictionary, which I'll call films. And by using the curly brackets, it ensures it'll either be a set or dictionary, and Python will determine which from the context. So what I can now do is add this film to the dictionary. And to do that, I can set films, and then I'll put in the key. And the key is the first element in the array, which is the film title. And the value is everything from the first element onwards. And I've just realized, I'm sorry, I should have just done equals there. That's better. So that will store that item in the dictionary. So let's actually see if this works before we proceed any further. What we've done, to do that, I can print out the films dictionary. And you can see it contains a dictionary. The key is always the film name, then there's a colon, and then the value is a list containing all the other bits of information. So what I could then do is read over the films, printing them out again. But to do that, I'm also going to show you how to sort dictionaries as well. So the problem at the moment is when we print out what we've done, the films aren't in any particular order. So what we're going to do now is to sort them. You can't sort a dictionary and keep it as a dictionary. So what you have to do instead is create a list of the sorted keys and then loop over the items in the list, printing out each dictionary element. Now, let me explain how that all works. So the first thing we're going to do is create a variable called sorted films. And what we'll do is use a sorted function on the dictionary. And as always, I think it's a very good idea to quickly have a look at what this has actually done, because it probably isn't what you expect. What I get is a list. You can see it's a list from the square brackets, which contains, as each item, the string of text giving the film title. So what this sorted function automatically does is take the keys of the dictionary and sort it by that. So we've got a bit of work to do before we can actually see the full dictionary items. So what I'm now going to do is loop over these films titles, do something for each one. So I can say let's call it title to emphasize the fact that's what they are in sorted films. And then for each one, I'll get the dictionary value. So to do this, I'm going to create a variable, let's call it value. And I'm going to take my dictionary called films, and I'm going to get something from it. The thing I'm going to get is I'll specify the key, and the key is the current film title. So that will give me access to all the other information about the film. And then what I can do is unpack this list to get details. So I'm going to create variables called certificate, director, Oscars, mins, and released, and set that equal to my value. And providing I've got the right amount of items in that, providing there were 6 items in my original list, 5 commas in each of these rows, it should all work. So then what I can do is just print this out to show it's working. So I'll print out the name of the film, which is the title, and then all the other information. Let's just miss out the Oscars and the other information just to show that it's not just printing everything out. And if I now try running that, you should see it gives me the information I asked for. The title, which is a key, and then 3 of the information held in the list in the value. And that is a very standard way to use dictionaries.